Now in today's session, I'm going to take you through how to set up a confirmatory factor analysis, or a CFA, using AMOS. I'm going to take you through this process quite slowly because, as I mentioned in class last week, there's a number of potentially fatal errors you can make when setting up the CFA that will ultimately lead you to not be able to test the model in the end. It will lead to some kind of error being made when AMOS tries to actually run the model. Okay, so we'll be going through each of these steps quite slowly, and I'm also going to be justifying why you do each of these steps as we set up the CFA. Now in today's session, we're going to be doing a CFA using the same example and also the same data set that we used to do the EFA in class last week. Okay, so we're going to be using the DAS, the Depression, Anxiety and Stress Scale, and we're going to be looking at whether or not the results we came up with the exploratory factor analysis also hold when we run the confirmatory factor analysis. So basically, we're going to be testing whether or not the factor structure that emerged from the EFA also holds with the CFA. Now this was the data file we used for that EFA, and as you can see, I've put an S next to the variables that came up as stress, an A next to the variables that came up as anxiety, and a D next to the variables that came up as depression. This will make it a lot easier to actually set up our confirmatory factor analysis. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is open up AMOS graphics. Right, for the moment we'll open up a new unnamed project, and what we want to do then is specify the data file that we're going to be reading the data from. When you have a go at doing this, either if you're doing it with this same data set, or whether you're doing it with your assignment data, just make sure you save that data file somewhere on your computer that you'll remember where it actually is. Right, for this exercise I've just saved the data file onto my desktop. Now when you open that data file, you'll notice that nothing really happens. All that we've done is we've told AMOS that that's the data file that we're going to be reading from when we set up our confirmatory factor analysis. Now when we did the EFA last week, we came up with a factor structure that had 3 factors or 3 constructs, and 2 of our constructs had 7 indicators, and our third construct had 6 indicators. Okay, so both stress and depression had 7 indicators, whereas anxiety had 6 indicators. Alright, so to reflect this, we want to press this icon here. We're telling AMOS that we want to draw a latent variable that has indicators. Okay, so we simply press that once with our mouse button. We then move the mouse without pressing any buttons over to the space where we draw the path diagram. Okay, then either on the left hand or the right hand side of the page, we want to hold the left mouse button down and simply pull it to the right and down a little bit. Okay, so we're holding the mouse button down. We want to draw a latent variable about this big. Okay, this will be our first factor. Now once we've drawn that, we move our cursor to the inside of that ellipse, and we press it however many times we have an indicator for that latent construct or for that factor. Okay, so our first factor has 7 indicators, or 7 items that load onto that factor. So we simply press our left mouse button 7 times. Now to keep it all on the page, all on the path diagram, we want to rotate this figure. Okay, so we need to go back to the menu, the icon menu, and click our rotate button. So we press that with our left mouse button, again pull the mouse over without pressing any buttons, and once we get into the inside of the ellipse, we press that once. Okay, that will put it onto the page. Now the next thing we want to do is we want to press this here, the big hand. If we press this, it will tell AMOS that we want to select everything. Okay, so we press that once such that the entire model comes up blue. Okay, so once we have the entire path model highlighted, we want to go to this button here that looks like a photocopy machine. We press that once. We then move our cursor across to the ellipse and don't press the mouse button until our cursor is inside the ellipse. Okay, so we press our mouse button when our cursor is inside the ellipse and we hold it down and just pull it straight down. Okay, we don't release just yet. We release when it's exactly where we want it, which is about here. And now we release. Now we do the exact same with this one. We press the mouse button again and we simply pull it down until it's in a nice neat position. And then we release. Now it's very important at this point that the very next thing you should do is you should go to this little hand here, or the clenched fist, and deselect all objects. If you don't deselect all objects, you'll really confuse AMOS, because what's going to happen when we're copying things and putting things onto our path model is going to want to put everything that you copy onto everything that's highlighted. Okay, and that's going to cause a large number of errors to occur later. So it's very important that you unselect once you've copied your factors twice. Okay, now like I said before, 2 of our factors had 7 indicators and the other factor, which was anxiety, had 6 indicators. So what we need to do is we need to go and delete one of the indicators for anxiety. Now anxiety it is the second factor in the DAS, depression, anxiety. So it's going to be represented by this second cluster of indicators and the factor. So we want to get rid of one of these indicators. Now the one that we want to get rid of, it can be any of these except the indicator whereby the arrow has a 1 on it. Okay, we don't want to delete this indicator. Okay, if we were to delete this indicator, we would be causing AMOS to have a problem later on. Okay, so in this case, like I said, we can delete any of the others. To keep this reasonably neat, we shall delete the bottom indicator and also the error term associated with that. Right, so we've nearly finished setting up our path model. The only thing we need to do now is to put titles into the respective indicator boxes and also the error terms. Alright, so what I'm going to do first is I'm going to unselect this erase objects button so that nothing is selected. I'm then going to double click inside our first ellipse, inside our first latent variable, and we'll call this latent variable depression. Okay, and we won't worry about a label for that. Now with this dialog box still open, I'm then going to just do a single click inside this second ellipse, and we're going to title this one anxiety, and our third one, a similar thing, we shall call stress. We can then close the dialog box. Once we've done that, we then move to this view menu up here, and we want to view variables in the data set. Now this will bring up the complete list of variables that we have in the data set that we opened at the start, that we specified at the start that AMOS should read from. And then it's just a matter of putting all the stress variables into the stress indicators. Okay, all the anxiety variables into the anxiety indicators, and same with depression. Okay, so the A's should go into the A's, the D's should go into the D's, and so on. Okay, so I'll just do all that now. Right, now if you were to make a mistake at some point, if you were to accidentally put the wrong indicator into the wrong box, all you need to do is simply get the right one and just put it into that particular box. If you've done something, you've made a mistake and you just want to go back, then the easiest thing to do is just undo or Control Z, which does the same thing. Right, now this is looking a little bit messy. The indicator titles are a bit too big for the box. So what we want to do then is similar to what we did in SPSS last week, is we want to replace the variable labels with the variable titles into each of the indicator boxes. To fix this, we go to View, Interface Properties, we then go to Miss, which means Miscellaneous, and we then unclick the Display Variable Labels box or option. Apply, and then we close it. And you can see this looks a lot neater. Okay, it's still not 100% neat. Ideally we'd have our variable boxes bigger than the actual titles that are in there, but for the purposes of this exercise it's not that important. If you're copying this to a paper you want to publish, on the other hand, then make sure it looks nice and neat. Okay, we've just about finished setting up this model. We have two more things to do. We need to first label these error terms. And one of the big differences between EFA and CFA is in CFA we specifically model error, whereas in EFA we don't. Now to do this, we simply press Plugins, name unobserved variables, and the program will know where to put the error terms. The last thing we need to do is specify correlations between these variables. Okay, we found out last week when we ran this during the workshop that the type of rotation that best fits this data set, or that is most consistent with the underlying theory and also the empirical outcome of the factor analysis, was an oblique rotation. Okay, so for this reason we should allow all of our factors to correlate with each other. Okay, and that's really all you need to do to set up your confirmatory factor analysis. To make this a little bit neater, the last thing we might want to press is this icon here, which will then resize the path diagram so that it now fits on the page nicely. Okay, and so that's basically all you need to do to set up a confirmatory factor analysis. In the next video I'll take you through exactly how to run the analysis and how also to interpret the output that AMOS generates.